Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's DevOps.com program, brought to you by Techstrong and Trilio. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting program ahead. First, I do need to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, maybe you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, and we really hope you do, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. Over on that right side of your screen, you'll find a couple of other options. You'll find the chat tab, and we'd like you to start warming that up for us now. Let us know where you're tuning in from, or maybe what role you play in your organization. If you click the handouts panel, you'll find a couple of resources that have been uploaded by Trilio and by us, including the Pulse Meter report that this whole program will be reviewing today. And of course, before we close out, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our topic of discussion today is mistakes to avoid when migrating data and applications across multi-cloud. I'm joined by Kevin Jackson, Principal Solution Architect at Trilio, and Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Kevin, Mike, thank you both so much for being here. Mike, do you want to get this conversation kicked off?
I do. Thank you, Cody. Thank everybody for joining us today. I'm here broadcasting from Techstrong headquarters in Boca Raton. We're here for an all hands meeting. So I got into a little bit of trouble for doing a webinar while we have our all hands meeting, but that's okay. I can take the flogging. I'm excited to be here with Kevin and really to talk about a pretty important topic. So we just got off of our annual Predict conference. So we did that last week. It was, again, fantastic from the standpoint of maybe 2 weeks ago. But it really gave us an opportunity to, talk about our trends and where we think things are going in the next year, really, but, kind of a little bit further along than that. And one of the things that really was obvious to us is the fact that we are entering into an age where there's less and less differentiation between your major, kind of high-end cloud providers. So, the infrastructure as a service folks, and this is one of the things we talked about in our digital transformation trends. But, really we're getting to a point of maturity with the infrastructure as a service providers that you're going to start to see workloads and applications being used across a number of different, kind of cloud providers. And sometimes it's within region, sometimes it's across region, sometimes it's in a lot of cases really a resilience type of thing. But we're going to start to see more arbitrage based upon pricing for kind of cloud services, right? We're going to start to see, kind of folks moving workloads because a new service that comes out from one of the providers from a differentiation standpoint. So what we wanted to do is really kind of start to get out ahead of that, right? We see it. We see the multi-cloud universe happening. We see, kind of the fact that most organizations are going to be using, more than one. And how do you start moving stuff around? What are the best practices to do that? So again, I'm very pleased to be joined by Kevin Jackson. Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? So before we kind of get going, just, who you are, what you do, kind of how long you've been doing this crazy stuff in cloud native and technology. That would be a great place to start.
Yeah. Hey, thanks very much, Mike. So hi everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to everybody today. So So I lead the solutions architect team here at Trilio. Trilio produce intelligent recovery software, backend recovery software for cloud native platforms like Kubernetes and OpenStack. So I lead that team. So I have a fantastic job. I have the great pleasure of being able to talk to lots of organizations, talk to people who are going through these journeys, and just have some fantastic, back and forths on where they're going in their particular business and where we can slot Trilio into those, into that process. My background is, I've started from traditional IT. I've moved my way into virtualization, moved into cloud, now into the world of cloud native world, that's where I got my gray hair. So I'm, hopefully I'm in good company. Hopefully people know where I'm coming from.
At least the gray hair, Kevin. I do understand where the gray hair comes from, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
So one of the things that kind of, and again, what we did working with Trilio is we put together this pulse meter. It is in the handout section of your webinar interface there, and what that involved was doing a quick poll to our audience, predominantly on Security Boulevard and DevOps.com. A little bit on Container Journal as well. And we asked them a series of questions, really about kind of where they come down on a number of these migration topics. So we're going to kind of sprinkle in, a whole bunch of conversation between Kevin and myself, but we're also going to, rely on some of the data that we got from, kind of the quick poll. And let's start there, because I think it is a good place to, really start. The first question was, how would you describe your organization's approach to cloud computing? 42% said hybrid, right? So they have workloads both in cloud and on premise, right? 24% cloud only. So workloads, all workloads run in the cloud. I would guess those are companies that have been founded in the last, 5 to 7 years, right? No legacy, no install base on that front. You've got 20% saying they are cloud first. So cloud, but cloud is the priority where it makes sense. And 12% got lost, right? Because they've got no cloud at all. So not sure why they took the time to be either on DevOps or Security Boulevard or to fill out the poll from that standpoint. But, I kind of take a look at this data, and then Kevin will get your perspective on it as well, and say that's pretty reflective of the conversations that I have with, kind of practitioners, up and down, kind of the stack, from large companies to small companies. You've got, most of the folks that are out there basically knowing they've got workloads and data that, kind of are going to be cloud hosted in a number of different cloud platforms, but they've got to deal with data that is, kind of on-prem. Right. It's only those early companies that, kind of have the luxury of being able to not deal with, kind of on-prem. But as we've seen, right, sometimes you end up, kind of moving and starting in cloud because it gives you more agility and velocity. And then, the economics make it so that, sometimes it may make sense to move into your own colo from that standpoint. So we could have a reverse thing on that front. And then again, cloud first, I think, makes sense for a lot of organizations because that's where they want their innovation to happen. But the reality is it doesn't pay for them to move, some of those existing workloads. So that's kind of my read on it. Yep. Kind of passes the sniff test. Kevin, are you seeing anything different in kind of the discussions you're having with customers?
No, it's about the same. I mean, we see a lot of on-prem at the moment, and then people exploring the off-prem kind of world and the public cloud, kind of world. We see people running the likes of OpenShift, on-prem, and now they're looking at those services that have now matured, like Arrow and Rosa. So, there's an alignment, but they're seeing the ability to, I don't know, be a little bit more agile, be a bit more flexible. I think cost is certainly a driving factor in some of these decisions. But equally, I'm also, like you just said, I'm seeing the reverse as well. I see people who have matured in the cloud, and they're now realizing that there's potential savings. They've learned, they've got all their efficiencies. They've learned how to do it all in the cloud as it should be. And now they're at the stage where, what are the costs associated with running these things back on-prem? It used to be quite dirty, in the on-prem world. It used to be like the big shift to the public cloud. It used to be the thing. You had to do that. It's far more accepting, certainly over the last couple of years, to actually have this on-prem footprint as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really just an acceptance of reality. With early technology, you go through this Pollyanna stage, right, where everything is wonderful and it's perfect, and we want to be there, and everybody's got to be there, and everybody wants to jump onto the bandwagon, and then at some point somebody, the adults come into the room at some point, turn around and say, hold on a second, you whippersnappers out there. I'm a gray hair guy, so I can use terminology like that. The kids out there aren't going to really understand that, but that's okay. Where they say, listen, we've got to understand and accept the fact that it doesn't make sense to move some of these workloads, but they are doing stuff. I mean, you mentioned OpenShift. I've done a number of, kind of assessments and analyses of, kind of clouds and cloud native environments over the last, 2 years. And if it was on-prem, it tended to run on OpenShift. Right. And then you started to think about, well, how do I make all this stuff fit together? How do I get data from one place to the other? How do I make it work? Kind of if I've got data in one place and application logic in another place. So application architecture continues to evolve from that standpoint. And again, I think it creates an interesting opportunity, obviously, for you, being a solution architect and working with customers to, help them understand this, but also for everybody out there that's really trying to grapple with how to handle a lot of these, new platforms. And I guess to me, the best advice I can give folks is there's really no playbook, right? And you should be making decisions based upon what that specific workload requires, right? So if it's something that is going to be best suited, to kind of running on-prem and, kind of environment and infrastructure that you already own, great. Right. If it's something that uses, kind of native capabilities in a cloud platform that really would be very costly to duplicate on-prem, well, that's okay too. Right. Having it all work together at the same time. Well, I think that's okay as well. Right. Because, again, we're really trying to get to a point where we're picking the computing platform, the infrastructure that makes the most sense for the application. Right. Not vice versa. You remember, right? Kind of old data center. It's like, well, what data repository are you going to use? Well, I'm going to use Oracle. Right. Well, why? Well, because that's what I have. Nobody gave me an option to use anything but, kind of Oracle. We had the site license for that. Now we have the ability to really pick the infrastructure for the application that we really need. So that was a whole bunch of words. What did I miss? What did I get right? What makes sense to you, Kevin, on that front before we kind of pivot into the next question?
Well, yeah, I think, just to, I guess, add to that, there's the world of, certainly where I come in terms of like the world of Kubernetes and things of that nature. We've now got platforms which allow us this flexibility. Before in the infrastructure as a service kind of world, you kind of had to pick and choose your battles. You had your on-prem infrastructure as a service. You might have had your cloud stacks, your open stacks, your whatever it was, the VMware variations. And then, of course, you had the infrastructure as a service, the big boys, the AWS, the Azures and things of that nature. But now we've got this thing in the middle called Kubernetes, and so this allows us to have this more of a level playing field between these two different, I guess, data centers, whether it's public or on-prem. So that's helped even things out for us. It's allowed people to be a lot more flexible. But I still think there's two camps. I still think there's the camp of the public cloud, which is a case of, hey, look, my efficiencies are all based on these public cloud services. So before, when you were saying about the drive to cloud, people are adopting AWS because it has very specific features, and they'll just buy completely into the ecosystem. That's very efficient for them. And then you get the other side of the world where people have a more generic approach. They've got more, agnostic kind of like view of the world where it's very acceptable and a lot easier now to actually build these platforms on this common layer, say Kubernetes, which now gives them this level of flexibility.
Yeah, you bet. And we'll get to it because, one of the, I guess there's always two sides to every coin, right? And as much as Kubernetes really provides that common infrastructure, really kind of on top of, right, or abstracting out, kind of the underlying architecture and infrastructure that's below that, obviously there are some specific complexities that go along with, kind of managing Kubernetes in a variety of different places. So we'll get to that because that's actually a very interesting topic. And again, something that I think is a critical kind of understanding to prepare yourself for any of these specific migrations as you're doing that. But let's not get the cart before the horse, to use a terrible analogy on that front. And let's kind of talk a little bit about, kind of the next data point, which again, I think is reflective of certainly, what we see, but also, something to start to keep an eye on, right? So in how many cloud providers do you have workloads deployed? Right? It's not playing around with, not experimenting, right? workloads deployed. So again, 15% say we don't use any cloud. Yeah, kind of we don't want to discriminate against these folks, right? They can still use cloud native infrastructure on-prem. Yep. So for sure we'll treat them with the respect that they deserve, even if they are kind of a little bit behind the 8 ball on a number of things. A little bit less than 30% have one cloud provider, right? 24.7% have two cloud providers, and then 30% have, or a little bit over 30%, right, have three or more cloud providers. So between them, I mean, again, I'm not too good at math, right? But that's over 50%, right? 55% that have more than two cloud providers that you're kind of dealing with on that front. And, one of the things, and I'll, kind of admit my bias up front, right? I've been doing security for 30 something years at this point. And, the last 10 have been really focused specifically on cloud security. And I can tell you that it's really, really hard to get good at doing security in one cloud, right? It's exponentially harder to be good at two clouds, right? Mm-hmm. And three or more clouds, I mean, forget it. I mean, they're just different. They've got different constructs. They've got, different ways of thinking about things. I know from an operational standpoint, the complexities are similar on that front. But the point is to sit here and commiserate about how hard our life is, right? That's not really, productive for anybody. The point that I see in this slide is really the fact that this is coming. Right. We've got 30% now that have one cloud provider. If you were to ask me to just make up some numbers, I think that's maybe 20%, maybe even less next year. Right. If we were to do the same poll in December of 2023, I think that's a lot less. And I think, kind of the number that have three or more cloud providers is up to 35, possibly even 40% on that front. I mean, that's just the trends that, kind of we're seeing because of that, ability to match the workload, to the cloud platform, right? The application to the cloud platform just gives you a lot more flexibility along those lines. So again, you're actually hands-on with a lot of these customers, helping them understand how to, kind of grapple with the infrastructure. So how do you really migrate them? If they're in one cloud and they're contemplating two clouds, how do you have that discussion, Kevin? Like, what is it that you kind of tell them that they really need to focus on and worry about as they're moving from, what's a pretty manageable environment, although not really that manageable, right? To something that can become unmanageable pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, the first standout from there is the 3+ number. I'll be honest, that quite surprised me. Most of the same conversations that certainly that I'm involved in, is a level of like I have my on-prem cloud. This is where most of our life begins. It's the on-prem kind of like scenario, and then there is the we're moving to a cloud. We have stuff in the cloud, and now we need to join the dots together. But the 3+, I mean, 3+ is a little is scary. It's not. The rules are still the same. The ability to have data migrated from one cloud to another, or one cloud and multiple clouds, is all completely the same. So in those kind of like scenarios, the conversation that we, or certainly that I have and have had in the past, is basically taking a very sensible approach to any of these migrations. You've just highlighted the fact that managing one aspect of this cloud, that people, I don't know, it's somebody's job to actually take care of security, within these these particular contexts. But from the application developer point of view, it's a case of, look, I have a containerized application. I can deploy this service somewhere else. Oh, this containerized application needs a database service, a message queue, a something. There's a lot of free reign that people have access to. I think, again, regardless of whether I'm wearing a Trilio shirt or it's a previous life, you've got to take a sensible approach to a lot of these. So migration for me, and certainly the early days, is piecemeal. It's making sure that you have a plan. It's making sure that you understand what you're getting yourself into. Multi-cloud is great for cloud failure. There's plenty of reports of them. We're not going to dwell onto any of them. So you're separating yourself from various types of cloud or cloud vendor type of outages, you've still got to manage your app. You've still got to have the visibility into your app. You've still got to have the, the observability. You've got to have the, the ability to update, the ability to apply patches. So don't get too carried away is my general kind of like advice on this. But take things step by step. Applications these days, thankfully can be broken down into more piecemeal type of applications and treat them as such. So that's certainly for, while we're talking about this, that's certainly an opening shot for me.
No, it does. And obviously I think that, kind of microservices and a lot of PaaS services that we've kind of layered into our application, architectures now really do help, with that migration. The one thing that, I also want to focus on before we kind of move into the next, kind of topic is the concept of specialization. Right. And the reality is, and I kind of flippantly said, well, it's hard to be good at one cloud. It's really hard to be good at two clouds. Give up, right? If you're trying to do three clouds. But a lot of that really gets back to specialization. So if you've got one cloud architect and your expectation is, they're going to be good at three clouds, that's not realistic. Right. I'm kind of conversational in terms of AWS. I'm very deep. In Azure, I'm pretty deep. Right. In GCP, I'm not that deep. Right at all. Oracle, not so much. Right. Kind of, and I'm one person. And by the way, this is kind of my job. Right. So my job is to kind of understand and be hands-on on a lot of these, different cloud platforms to some degree. Right. So if you've got somebody that's got operational responsibilities in a variety of different clouds, that's going to be hard. But if you've got, you represent a large enterprise or some other organization of scale, and you have the ability to have at least a resource or two that are trained and certified on some of these cloud platforms, it starts to get a bit easier. Again, not easy. Let me just be clear about that, right? Not easy, but a little bit easier because, again, they understand the constructs, they understand the language, they understand how the services fit together. Because Lord knows how Microsoft does stuff is just fundamentally different than how Amazon, right, or AWS, does stuff. So and Google, and then forget Oracle, right? Like you get their IBM, Alibaba, Linode. I mean, there are dozens of these cloud providers. So it really, if you want to get good at multi-cloud, I think you do have to have folks, and you have to make that investment in the specialization along those fronts. But reiterating on your point, Kevin, because I think it's absolutely critical that folks understand they have to have a plan for working and moving data between these different cloud platforms. And again, if it's a wholesale move, that's one thing, right? If it's something where we've got to have these platforms coexist because you have one part of the application running in one provider, another part of the application running on-prem, and it all works together and it's integrated somewhere else. Again, without a plan to do that, it ends badly. I've seen it end badly. I've run into places just like, oh my God, where's your plan? And they're like, well, we kind of just evolved to this. I mean, just again, really difficult to be successful if you're not intentionally trying to understand, who's responsible for what and how the data flow is really going to work, kind of between these different platforms. All right. What's next? What do we have next? What are you using to move data, applications, and configurations as part of your migration? So 43% general purpose backup software. Okay. 27% backup software specifically supporting Kubernetes. 16% backup software specifically supporting Docker. And 14% backup software specifically supporting OpenStack. So, basically we have a little bit less than 45% saying we use generic stuff. And we have everybody else basically saying, we're kind of targeted towards our, kind of abstraction or computing platform at that front. That makes sense to you? Or is there something, folks should be doing differently when they start, thinking about the tooling that, kind of is going to enable this type of migration?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the key thing, considering this is my daily life now. This is so. First and foremost, backup is always easy. That's always the easy piece. I can always take a backup of something. I can tarball something. I can zip something up. Well, what do you do with it? Once you've got it in that particular state. So you can tick the box, but now you've got this lump of data, this application that really only belonged to where it came from. So more intelligent platforms, things that are specific to the platform, give you the greatest flexibility, and then you start to see the fact that they're more than just backup or recovery. They're something which can migrate data. They are the tools specific for the purpose. And Trilio exists for a reason. Trilio exists for a reason because people come to us to actually help them do these particular migrations. The tool that has like intelligence to say, okay, I know where it came from, but I have the flexibility and the smarts to say, well, I can understand my target environment. That's where you get the efficiencies, and then you start to look at backup and recovery in a completely different light. You start to look at your application as something which is now a bit more portable. You've got this tool that's now an engine rather than a static. It's a zip file. It's a toggle. It's a command that you've just run once. So you start to get a little bit more dynamic, and that's really the premise of the cloud in the first place. So again, it's just natural. You just start to have this more fun with your application rather than it being like a 2:00 in the morning migration job.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit, Kevin, because that's really interesting, right? Because that's kind of looking at the situation in a different perspective, right? Kind of looking at it from a different or through a different, kind of prism. And when you think about, kind of back up, when you think about migration, again, I think a lot of it is focused on the whole resilience aspect of things, right? Which is this thing has to be up and running. I got to be able to restore it quickly. I have to, again, depending on the nature of the application, maybe it's I can't afford any downtime. In other cases, it's minimizing the downtime. Obviously, that costs everybody money on that front. But, this idea of not necessarily just, considering it a backup or a resilience play, but really maybe a cost efficiency play, right? Maybe it's a performance play, depending on, again, what the cloud provider or on-prem environment, right? What that can afford to the organization, right? And again, I mean, I think that becomes and paints the whole discussion really in a little bit of a different, kind of light, right? So as opposed to what you're trying to do with backup, right, is minimize the cost. And I don't want it to cost me a lot of money, right? It's got to work, right? I want to do it for the cheapest, I can, to give me, kind of the uptime or kind of really the minimizing the downtime aspects that I need for the least amount of money. When we start to paint it in a way which is about maybe supporting different kinds of applications on different kind of platforms, right? Maybe it's really about improving the performance of, kind of this environment at any given time, right? I'm able to start to think a little bit differently about, kind of what I'm willing to invest and the kinds of tooling that would make sense for that kind of thing. So is that kind of the general mind jump that customers have to make to really appreciate what you guys do every day?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, it's if you go and search for this type of software, obviously will pop up under the banner of backup and recovery. My favorite moments are when we're talking to the customers and they have those aha moments. The kind of the eye opener of like, oh, that's pretty cool. Back and recovery, it's quite a stagnant kind of process. It's a back end kind of thing that IT have been doing for decades. And your data just goes to die. Just, there's a retention policy, it gets deleted and just, gets overwritten with some more stale data. So having the ability to see data in a different way, yes, okay, we've now got a backup. That's core to what we've been doing for the last, God knows, 8-9 years in this particular space. But then if you actually see the fact that the thing that actually created that now has the ability to talk to different clouds, has the ability to run this little engine to actually do this recovery, here, there, and everywhere. It allows the conversation to go in a completely different way. Like you just said, people who are thinking that they're stuck on their current platform, they can very easily pick up a tool like Trilio and just be able to say, okay, well, I can then redeploy this application and try. Let's think of the world of just the trying people on GKE, on EKS, AKS. They want to look at the performance. They want to see what the other world is like. That's the low-hanging fruit. And they're the ones that don't even come to us for migration. They're the ones that go, oh wow, we can also do this. So that's the difference with a native tool versus a generic tool. It's not just there to go, okay, I'm doing this this thing in the background, by a few engineers, under, through like intravenous drip coffee, at 4 a.m. It now just becomes part of the life.
And again, let's kind of parse that out a little bit more, right? Because I would guess when you think about different alternatives that folks have to kind of doing something in a native or certainly a commercial type of fashion, right? It would seem to me to be something like Python. Right. So a bunch of guys get, they bust out their editor and they start building some Python scripts, right, to start moving some data around. Right. What are some of the things that don't get factored in, when you do have these, kind of caffeine driven, kind of developers at 4 a.m. doing something that, they probably know they shouldn't be doing, but it's just like, I got to get this thing, shipped. And this is, kind of a critical path item. So I'll just move some data around, this way using my scripts, right? What are the things that they can't possibly get right, given that kind of environment?
Well, I mean, from the bat, they're having to overthink the problem. I've worked for engineers for decades, and they're incredibly intelligent people. And when they come to solve a problem, they'll go, okay, I can solve this. And you see them, loading up Vim, and they're doing all the stuff, and they will do what they're meant to do. The problem is, it's like, well, we could have saved you like at least 2 days worth of effort by just using a tool which actually just does this without even, skipping a heartbeat. So that's the world that we're having to translate into. We're having to, not have to talk to these engineers. They're lovely people, but we're having you need to have these conversations with the right level of people to realize that it's an engine. It's a fantastic engine. These things which we talk of were they're native to those platforms, but they're for a reason. So they cut down time and effort.
That's right.
And to give you the guardrails. So going back to your point about these engineers who are having to do stuff, but mistakes will happen. They will miss things. When you've got something which can discover your applications, all the dependencies, because that's what it's designed to do. Honestly, you'll have a much easier life.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll add, and I've actually had to learn this lesson the hard way, right, is that, the APIs and the documentation of those APIs that you use to integrate with a variety of these services and platforms may not be, I don't want to say correct, right? I really shouldn't say out loud that in a lot of cases they're just dead wrong. But that's been my experience, right? So I've spent a whole bunch of time, not just, building the base code, right? Because that's one aspect of it, but, doing the integration work with a variety of these different platforms through what should be standard, somewhat, kind of stable APIs. And it turns out, just again, what you expect to be there just isn't there. What they say is there doesn't work like how it is that they say. And the end result is, again, you burn up a whole mess of time trying to troubleshoot an API that works just fine if the documentation would reflect that. So again, that's more time that you don't budget into the process in order to do stuff that really should be pretty straightforward, but ultimately in practice never is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's ugly. That's a great place to kind of draw wrap a bow around that conversation. So let's talk a little bit about what we're migrating. Right. So there's migrating to the cloud, there's migrating amongst, kind of different cloud providers, there's breaking up based upon microservices. So, there's obviously some different, kind of complexity and nuance, right, to this question. But let's just kind of go through the data, right? So what kind of applications are you migrating to the cloud? So pretty straightforward. 30%, a little bit less than 30%, right? Traditional applications built with monolithic or SOA architectures. So that, again, in my experience, can either be an opportunity to refactor it and leverage some of the, kind of cloud native capabilities of your platform or of Kubernetes or something like that. Or it's a lift and shift where you're just like, I got to get this thing out of a data center that I'm losing or a colo that I'm kind of migrating away from. So I'm just going to move it to, a different platform. Right. Similar type of number are cloud native containerized, microservice, service mesh. So those are applications that are really built with this new architecture in mind, leveraging these capabilities that are there. Again, 27% using containerized, using some cloud native infrastructure. So that's, half baked. right? So, folks are starting to, think about, some of these new services. Maybe they pulled out some microservices and put in some others as they continue to refactor. And then 14% are containerized, but not cloud native. Right. So again, you got a pretty good mix there. Nothing that is dominating from we see a bulk of the applications that kind of look like that. So to me, that kind of indicates that, kind of flexibility is really critical, right? Because we can't make the assumption that we're going to have certain underlying capabilities within the application. We can't, kind of assume that we're going to have specific, APIs or the ability to integrate or call APIs in order to, take advantage of some of this stuff. So again, when you think about tooling to really kind of support and enable this kind of migration, it would seem that, being able to support all of these kind of environments should be, a critical path item. Did I get that wrong, or is that kind of, where you sit?
Yeah, well, we get a funnel. So certainly my day job, I get to see a funnel, of like what we see on the chart here. So obviously from the containerized app side of things. So I specifically see 2 or 3 out of that particular chart. I see the monolithic stuff where people are traditionally run that as virtual machines. And at that point, the conversation does move into the world of refactoring onto a common platform, the OpenShift, the Kubernetes, the EKS, the AKS, so those literally the Kubernetes type landscape. That's what I very specifically see, but part of those conversations, we're fortunate, is the fact that they realize that this application should have portability, should have this concept of being able to deploy here and there. And so we get the chance to be part of those particular journeys. We're able to say, okay, well, you can deploy to this. We can be able to use tooling to be able to say, do you know what? EKS might be the platform for you. GKE might be the platform for you, even though you're on Onprem running OpenStack or VMware, whatever it is today. So we're part of those kind of conversations. But certainly, definitely, as I'm wearing this particular shirt, we see the funnel of this. We see that we get involved in those conversations very specifically from the containerized, Kubernetes world. So I'm kind of like removed from some of the earlier conversations. But that said, generally in the industry, we're all very aware of what's happening out there. I would agree with the figures that are on this chart.
Yep. And again, part of it is just understanding that we are going to see applications, in every place along that continuum, right? From, totally modernized and built using kind of the latest and greatest modern development and componentry on that front, to things that, we haven't kind of looked at or 10 or 15 years, totally monolithic and really doesn't make sense to, re-architect or refactor. There's no upside to that, right? And whatever tooling you have has to support, again, that continuum of applications, because again, you want to make sure that you can support pretty much everything that's happening in your environment. So that, again, that's, I think, the backdrop there, but understanding that, we're going to have a mix, and I don't expect this to change, right? We spent a bunch of time talking about how we think the cloud usage, kind of chart's going to change. I think this will be probably pretty consistent. I mean, maybe as we move a bunch of the, kind of monolithic applications, that'll go down over time, but I always remember that it's a really big world, and there are, hundreds or thousands of applications within each, kind of company or enterprise of scale that they forget about. Right. And at some point, they're going to have to figure out what to do with those. So again, flexibility, I think, is key to supporting, these use cases.
Yeah. And just on that point, sorry, the Mike, it is a case of that, there is an assumption that everything is going to be containerized. It just isn't, there is and it doesn't have to be. I think it's like anything. There is a big drive to like go to public cloud. It's equivalent today. It's like everything should be containerized. Not everything should, not everything will. But a high percentage obviously will be, and that's completely the right thing to do. And then we just see the slow tail as things die off over time.
That's right. Yeah, we always forget the long tail of everything, right? And because it's not sexy anymore at that point. So we don't want to talk about it. But the reality is there's still a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be in that bucket for a long period of time to come. All right. So how important to your business is the ability to migrate applications across distributed infrastructure? So this one would seem to be pretty self-evident, but you always like to see the data that validates what you think is the right thing, right? So it is a little bit, kind of good and I'd say somewhat gratifying to say, okay, 53% say this is pretty important to us, right? Very important. 23%, say it's somewhat important. So 76% are basically saying, the ability to migrate is something that we really have to, think about and be able to do. Whereas, again, 20% are neutral or not very important. Again, very few say not very important at all. So, to me, this is really indicative of the fact that folks do understand that migration is going to happen in their environment. And whether it's a one-time thing as I'm moving out of one platform into another, whether it's something that we want to really leverage over time as a way to, arbitrage performance or cost or what have you. But having, again, the ability to do that consistently, right, and efficiently, I think is the key message that I take out of this one.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think there's a bit of a misconception in terms of like this migration. It's almost like it's a one-way street. It's like, hey, I've migrated now, job done. But it's not. It's this is actually about portability. This is about having that flexibility to say, yes, I've migrated there. But you don't want to go through the same pains and processes and realizing that you're going to do this again in 2 or 3 years' time. So again, part of the strategy, part of the thinking and the planning should be a case of, yes, I can migrate to EKS, but next year, 2 years' time, a new exec comes in, and they're going to go to Azure. So it's going to happen, and having that mindset honestly just gives you the greatest freedom and flexibility.
No, it does. And one of the things, so kind of outside of this poll that we did for this project, right? We're doing some research into, kind of portability and cloud provider selection as well. And the data was interesting, right? I'm still kind of correlating it and analyzing it, and, kind of things are still moving around. So use a fishing analogy, right? It's not quite in the boat yet. It's on the hook, but not quite in the boat yet. But what seems to be pretty indicative is that respondents or customers want portability, right? They're not exactly sure why yet. So you ask them about a couple of different use cases and they're like, yes. So they don't really understand what it is, why, but something is telling them that, kind of they do need to be able to provision for that. And I think that's kind of a similar, type of thing, which is they know it's going to be important. They can't really pinpoint exactly why quite yet, but they understand that, kind of we started to move to, kind of the cloud because we wanted more flexibility. We wanted more agility. We didn't want lock-in, right? And then you look at, kind of why some of the cloud native capabilities, right, especially Kubernetes, are really kind of catching fire in the broad market, and it's because they did want that flexibility. They do want that vendor neutrality, kind of avoiding that vendor lock-in. And again, I think that kind of having the tooling and really as important as the tooling, right, but the processes to be able to support consistent, effective, and efficient, migration of these application, kind of components and capabilities. Again, whether it's future-proofing the architecture or, just kind of covering their backside, right? Listen, I don't want to get into a place where I can't get out, right? Kind of the old, in through the outdoor, can't go in through the outdoor, at this point, So I think that's kind of weighing on a lot of folks as well in my discussions.
Yeah, I agree. To that point, I mean, and that's where that little bit of flexibility comes in. If you're going to going to do a little bit of the uplift to begin with, let's go that extra mile and realize there's a you've got greater flexibility at that point, options. At that point.
There is. Okay, so I think the last question that we had, which is great, and then we can get some Q&A. So folks do have kind of questions in the Q&A, Kevin and I will be happy to do that. We have a question. So, you know what, I like to do the questions in stream, right? Because usually it has to do with, kind of what we just talked about. So we have a question here. Can it be costly? And do some application architectures need to be rewritten when migrating? So I'll let you take a cut at that one, Kevin. That's a good softball one, right? That one should be pretty straightforward to answer.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the logical view is some applications possibly should be rewritten, re-architected. You go to the cloud, you want to take advantage of something. Doesn't have to be costly though. That there is a valid route of lift and shift, and bear with me when I kind of explain that. Does have a tag attached to it to say that that's not the right thing to do, but you've got to look at the bigger picture. If you mentioned cost, sometimes it is a cost-saving move to actually move to the cloud, in which case an appropriate lift and shift is the right thing to do. But conversely, you might actually find that, splitting up that application might actually make that migration to the cloud a little bit easier. You might have some, a little bit of tendrils still back onto, your original application. You've now just branched out into the cloud. And then over time, you can actually bring that application up to speed. So I think, I don't think it has to be costly at all. Sometimes there is an extra time, taken to do this in a more future-looking state. But again, it goes back to my original point: plan and do it in stages, and you'll get your efficiencies.
Yep, that's right, and I think your point about kind of, I don't think there's any award to rebuilding the application as you're moving it, right? So you do what you need to do, right? I mean, if for example, again, I grew up as a networking guy, so I tend to kind of think from the bottom up of stuff, and so when I look at kind of refactoring an application, maybe it's something as simple as kind of again, leveraging, a cloud-based CDN to, kind of distribute the, static content that drives an application. Is that refactoring? Yes. Is it complicated? Not really. Right. And I want to make it sound like so simple, but relative to, kind of rewriting portions of the application, we're not doing that. Right. We're taking advantage of some of the infrastructure capabilities of the platform we're moving it to, that again just gives us more flexibility to be able to again really kind of make it fit on the platform that we're selecting it to. So we got another question while we're here. Again, Trilio specific, so this is one that I actually can't answer even if I tried. I could make some stuff up, but I'm not going to do that while I have you here. So can Trilio transform applications from one distribution to another while migrating from one cloud to another? So is it a matter of just data movement? Do you have kind of some viewpoint into the actual application, or is that something that again the developers would really have to kind of do specifically while they're migrating?
So Trilio, so if we're talking Trilio Vault for Trilio for Kubernetes and OpenShift, so what that tool will actually see would actually be seeing your application. It would see the dependencies. It would see how it's deployed into say Kubernetes. So I can answer it into the context of like I've got a Kubernetes on-prem, and I can go to any number of the clouds. You name any of the clouds that are running either native Kubernetes or self-deployed Kubernetes. So we can migrate those applications on there with the transformation. We can say, yes, you came from this on-prem world with this type of infrastructure. Might be the storage, might be the load balancer used, it might be whatever has that, that was relevant for that on-prem. Just doesn't make sense now for this off-prem kind of world. But with one line of YAML, one or two lines of YAML, you can actually say, okay, well, it now runs on EKS, it now runs on Azure, it now runs on wherever. So that's literally the power. That's fundamental to the magic that sits behind like this little engine that will be able to take your data from one place to the other. We can handle that application, that data transformation for you, and you can say, hey, look. On-prem, off-prem, we can do this continually. We have a feature called continuous restore, and you can say just send the data to these multiple clouds continually as part of your migration journey.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Okay, good. So let's kind of last question here, right? What are issues are you worried could cause downtime on your cloud native infrastructure? So Always good to, get the Chicken Little perspective of stuff, kind of how is the world going to fall on me? And again, I think that's just my security background. I'm always looking for places I'm going to get killed. So I'm looking 4 times, kind of before I cross the street, just because, again, I'm trained to do that over 30 something years. But the data is kind of interesting, right? So big issue, misconfiguration, 50%. Right. Kind of 22% say cloud and hardware outages, 10% ransomware, 17% external attack, which to me is really interesting, right? Because I've been one of the folks that have been talking about, kind of operational excellence and how difficult that is. And the fact that, a lot of your both downtime and in a lot of cases exposure is due to not some bad actor in there, not some, failure of the underlying infrastructure. It's somebody doing something wrong, in a lot of cases, not even maliciously. Right, because they're humans. So it's interesting to me to see, kind of that data. And I had somebody in the Q&A, kind of make another point. They've got to migrate 400 applications in a year without any time to refactor, straight lift and shift. And misconfiguration is something that could really, kind of impact them. I think that's exactly right. Interesting that, cloud and hardware outages are 22%, because, when you compare that to, kind of the typical downtime in a data center versus, kind of what you see in the cloud, they would seem to be a little varied on that point. But, that's people's perception, right? That, kind of the cloud is not within their control. So therefore it can't possibly be as, as resilient. And then really the attack side of it, right? 27%, say external attack or ransomware. So that was interesting data to me. Any observations you have out of that, Kevin?
No, I think it's true. I mean, we're getting, we have a lot more of those conversations around that misconfiguration stuff, so obviously from one feature of what we do, obviously we know the application. We discover your application. We know the state of that application in time, and we can take a stateful backup of that application at that point in time. You can do comparisons. You can have your live view, and you can have what you're meant to have that view of. But yeah, I mean, to be frank, I'm surprised it was so large. That I think I knew it would be a large figure. I just didn't think it would take up most of the pie chart. So I think that was my shock.
Me too. Right. Me too. Because I feel like I've been just, kind of screaming into the abyss, for the last, 7 to 10 years saying, listen, if you folks suck at operations, it's going to get really messy when you kind of go into a variety of these different, platforms, because, one wrong setting, right, opens up your environment to, potentially everything. Right. So having, kind of that environment is just, challenging from that perspective. Wait, one other question, and then we can, start to wrap up. So in your experience, again, this is probably more directed towards you, Kevin, than me. Would you say that there are some workloads more suited to a particular public cloud provider than others? So are some, more apropos to GCP versus AWS versus Azure? And, when you kind of see these targets of the, migrations that you guys are involved with, are folks picking clouds for certain reasons?
Only towards certain verticals. It's not really aimed more at the public cloud players. I'm not going to play one against the other. I can bring it a little bit home in terms of like the platform, say the likes of the OpenShifts of the world and the Tanzus of the world, which are vertically aligned to telcos. So that's where we get. That's where we we spend a lot of time with our customers, and you have a lot of customers in that particular space. So those, that OpenShift and the Tanzus, that's what we see that are particularly suited for telcos, and and certainly more biased towards the OpenShift side of things, if I'm being quite honest, if I'm allowed to. I mean, everything's all great. Everything is, plenty of other clouds are available. But that's what I see, but not really the public clouds. And I just see that the alignment OpenShift, for example, allows you to have this OpenShift everywhere. But it's again, it's not certainly the workloads I see are not. I don't see that segregation, me personally. So
yeah. So what's interesting, and I do see because I've again spent a decent amount of time just working with clients on cloud specific stuff as opposed to application specific stuff, and we do see again AWS tends to attract the folks that were either early adopters or really want a lot of the knobs and the services that, kind of they have, available. So something that's going to require a decent amount of customization or, some nuance in terms of, kind of cloud-based services to support the workload. AWS tends to be a pretty good option there. If you're, .NET or using any of those kind of application, kind of infrastructure components, Azure's a very simple, option. From that standpoint, I mean, it's really built to support those applications. So that's it's never transparent, right? But it definitely facilitates the migration, to a platform like Azure if you are using, kind of those constructs in your application. And GCP, we see a lot of two use cases there, right? Heavy analytics. Right. So heavy analytics, we do see a lot of GCP and cost sensitivity on, fairly large SaaS providers. So GCP's done a really good job of being very cost competitive to folks that had way too large AWS bills and kind of had folks migrate along those lines. So that's kind of where we start to see, those two. But again, the more you go towards serverless architecture, right, the more you go towards, some of these, again, native services, the less flexibility you're going to have to move them. So again, that's always a consideration too, which is why I think there's so much interest in a lot of the cloud native projects to run those types of projects. All right. Well, let's wrap up, Kevin. Gosh, it's hard to believe that was almost an hour. We just, kind of shooting the breeze on this migration topic. So why don't you wrap up? Have any other parting thoughts to folks in terms of stuff they really need to think about as they're contemplating, kind of a migration utility within their environment?
I think it's just more summarizing, the fact that I don't know how many times we have to mention this. It is about planning. It is about doing your research. It's about researching your own applications. It's about understanding what you're taking on, as part of these migration strategies. But the other thing is you just don't treat it as a single big project that is a checkbox exercise. There's going back to your original point. I mean, you're taking advantage of these clouds because of the application now. The application is flexible enough to run on these cloud providers. It's a world where the developers are allowed a little bit more free reign and get all the efficiencies. But so you say just do it for the right reasons, and going back to one of those original charts, the charts you showed a few slides ago about the tooling. It is about using the right tool for the right job. I mean, we do that for our own home improvements. We do it for repairing our cars. It applies completely for the IT and cloud world as well.
And what's funny is I'm sure you, like many of us, have had the experience of not having the screwdriver, but you have a scissor. So you're sitting there trying to figure out how to jury rig the scissor to, kind of use it on the slotted head, and it ends badly. It dulls your scissor and it doesn't really open the screw. And you're just like, oh, I just got to get my ass up and go and get the, get the screwdriver on that front. So I think that's a great summary point, right? Use the right tool for the job, but understand what the job is. And that's really part of the whole message here, is that, we're going to have a lot of different permutations and combinations of, kind of applications and platforms and workloads and distributions and infrastructure components and the like, and really kind of viewing that as, something that I want, both process and tooling that's going to support, the maximum amount of flexibility, because, listen, I'm no fortune teller on this front, but I can tell you there's going to be more cloud, kind of platforms moving forward. There's going to be a lot more applications moving forward, like our friend who has to migrate 400 applications in the near term. I hear a lot of that. Right. They do the first 20 and they're like, great, let's do the next 400. And you're like, whoa, right. I'm just not necessarily ready for that. So these are the, critical things to, kind of really focus on as you're thinking about that. All right. Good. So I want to thank Kevin Jackson. Really appreciate your time, man. I thought this was a great conversation. We got to talk about a little bit of data and hit a little bit on the migration side. And with that, Cody, why don't you come on back and, actually you can get the pulse meter. So there was another slide in there that you can get the pulse meter. But Cody, why don't you wrap up and give away some goodies, because that's our favorite part of the of the event.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, Mike, thank you both for being here. And just like Mike said, if you did want to download a copy of the Pulse Meter report, it is available in that handout section. So feel free to grab that right now while I'm closing out. So I would like to remind everyone that this session was recorded. Maybe you joined us late, or maybe you're not listening at all right now and you've left us early. You can rewatch this on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and you will also be receiving an email with a link to access that recording on demand. On to our 4 $25 Amazon gift card winners. We have David F., Victoria G., Rakib M., and Sid S. So to David, Victoria, Rakib, and Sid, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card, but if you don't happen to see that email, do check your spam folder. I'd like to thank Trilio for sponsoring today's program and give a big shout out to Techstrong Research as well for gathering and interpreting the polling data that was reviewed today. And to our audience, thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate your time, and we also really appreciate your feedback. So as soon as we close out, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen. Feel free to tell us what you liked about our program or what you'd like to see on future programs. Otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming Techstrong Learning program. Have a great rest of your day, and you may now disconnect.